What if I told you that at the top levels of finance and government, people are talking behind the scenes about how to use XRP as the foundation of America's future financial system? Imagine that the United States, which is deeply in debt, over 40 trillion, all of a sudden discovered a new way to gain power, a way to update payments, fix markets that aren't working properly, and become the world's financial star again. The plan? To use digital assets, and XRP in particular, in a way that could change not only how debt is handled, but also how money goes around the world. Please note that this is not financial advice. Let's get into it, because if this happens, it will have huge effects on history. The US national debt has grown to more than 40 trillion, and the interest payments alone are now bigger than the defense spending. The bond market, which has always been the main way that the US borrows money, is showing signs of financial problems. Treasury sales are getting less stable, and countries that owe money to the US, like China and Japan, are selling less US debt. That's right, the old system is sagging from the weight of it. Now come XRP. One thing has always been at the center of Ripple's system: cross-border settlement that works quickly and cheaply. The XRP system is more than just payments, though. This is a money system that can be programmed to tokenize assets, move money quickly, and bring liquidity to some of the world's least liquid markets. In that group are debt markets, real estate markets, swaps markets, commodity markets, and more. Imagine for a moment that the US government starts to hold XRP as a strategic reserve instead of just releasing more treasury bonds. It's not as crazy as this thought sounds. We already know that the government has set up rules for storing digital assets. We also know that the cryptocurrencies that police have taken are being put together. A reserve of digital assets backed by the government is already in motion. It's just not big enough yet. Now imagine that Ripple works with the US government to put tens of billions of XRP from its huge trust account into this strategic reserve. That makes a hoard right away under the control of the US Treasury. Ripple's supply falls below the decentralization barrier, and the US gains a position in digital assets that could be revalued as more people use them. We need to talk about reform. People often talk about the gold seizure of 1933, when President Roosevelt repriced gold at a higher dollar value after making people give up their gold. In theory, the same idea could work here, but this time it's XRP instead of gold. This is where things get interesting. No one can turn on a switch and instantly make $10,000 worth of XRP. People buy and sell XRP on open markets. But what can happen is that establishment demand plus government adoption can keep the price going up. The circulating supply of XRP will drop as the Treasury and other big institutions start to use large amounts of it for operational liquidity. This will cause price pressure to rise. Let's do some math. If the US had 5 billion XRP tokens, each worth $8,000, that would be worth $40 trillion, which is enough to pay off the whole national debt. Now, is it possible for XRP to reach $8,000? A number of things are needed. Massive institutional adoption, tokenization of debt markets, the use of XRP in cross-border payments, and the acceptance of XRP as a standard for liquidity around the world. It's not tomorrow. This is a long-term plan, but the plan is out there. Let's change things up now. That is, the US would need a way to collect, store, and use digital assets before this could even happen. That's already starting. Don't forget that Ripple holds about 48% of XRP in trust. There are 1 billion new tokens available every month. Ripple usually relocks 700 million, but some still circulate. But what if those funds were moved somewhere else? The distribution problem would be fixed in an instant if Ripple transferred a large amount of escrow to a government account as part of a deal. Ripple gets clearer rules, anarchy grows, and the US gets a huge digital reserve. That's the first part. The second part is having the rules match up. XRP should be seen as more than just a digital asset. It could also be used as a strategic backup currency or a tool for settlement. Laws would have to be changed so that banks and the government could store and deal with XRP. Things are already moving in this direction. Recent talks about stablecoin regulation, tokenization tests from BlackRock and ODL providers, and the World Economic Forum's focus on the XRP ledger for debt tokenization are all things to look at. The pieces are being put together in silence. It's time to adopt. Tokenizing US debt is a chance worth $1 trillion. The US bond market is worth $58 trillion, and the world market is worth over $140 trillion. If even a small amount of this moves onto the XRP system, the demand for XRP cash goes through the roof. Imagine that $1 trillion worth of tokenized bonds need to be settled every day. XRP doesn't have to be used for its full value, but the fact that it is used as a bridge currency in every trade makes people want it. Then, institutions start to store XRP as practical liquidity, which takes more out of circulation. When demand goes up and supply goes down, simple economics takes over. Last but not least, ways to pay. Once XRP goes up in value a lot, the US could pay its debts straight with it. Think about paying off a bill by sending 1,000 XRP to Japan. Japan can keep the XRP or change it into YMI. This is easy to do with liquidity pools. The US could also turn its XRP reserves back into dollars at high prices and then pay its bills in the usual way. XRP is the currency that takes in and sends value across borders no matter what. The great thing about this method is that it also makes America stronger in the world. The US can become the leader in digital financial infrastructure, beating out China's digital yuan projects and other rivals by using blockchain rails to speed up payments, lower settlement costs, and make more payments. The best part is now here. If global institutions use XRP to settle all kinds of tokenized assets like stocks, real estate, and carbon credits, the size of what could happen is almost limitless. This is where people talk about XRP being worth $10,000 or even more. It's not about the hype. It's about putting trillions and trillions of dollars worth of assets on a digital record, and XRP is the link. People aren't just talking about technology. They're also wondering if XRP could become the currency of the next age in American history. That brings us right to the second part of this talk. What would have to happen for that plan to come true if it exists? What, if any, effects would this have on the world's economies, governments, and overall way of life? The first thing we should do is talk about how money works. The U.S. government is currently in charge of a national debt that is more than $40 trillion. And that number isn't just numbers on a screen. It stands for debts that need to be paid off, rolled over, and constantly defended in a world where trust in the U.S. dollar is the most important thing. The problem is that the usual ways of dealing with such huge debt, raising taxes, cutting spending, or inflating prices, are publicly unpopular, dangerous for the economy, or unstable for society. But here's the important catch. Adopting XRP is more than just making payments on new lines. The token must have a lot of value for this to have anything to do with the debt problem. So much value that turning parts of national or foreign transactions into XRP reserves could really pay off trillions of dollars in debt. Because of this, the US would have to either directly or indirectly make it possible for the price of XRP to go up a lot. Here is where the word reset comes into the talk a lot. Let's look at the steps. Step 1, make the law clear. In its case against Ripple, the SEC is not only going after one business. It has to do with drawing lines between what is a security and what is a digital good or cash. It will be easier for institutions to use XRP if it is publicly called a commodity or a currency under U.S. law. Anyone could hold and trade XRP without worrying about getting in trouble with the law. This includes banks, payment providers, and maybe even government funds. No important government plan could move forward without that clarity. Step 2 is to connect to the system. There are already agreements between Ripple and banks and money transfer services. Hundreds of schools around the world in places like Asia, Europe, and the Americas. The RippleNet system is made for quick, cheap, and easy transborder payments that can be tracked. To bring the U.S.'s financial system up to date, especially for foreign trade and wholesale settlements, it would be faster to build on a network that has already been tested in pilot programs than to make something completely new. Ripple has a ready-made platform thanks to its years of development, tests with central banks, and connections to big names in the financial world. Third step, how supply and worth work. There will only ever be 100 billion XRP tokens available. About half of them are being used, the rest are either locked up in trust or running the show for Ripple. As only a small part of the total supply could be used for sovereign-level financing, XRP's unit price would have to go up a lot for it to work as a national or foreign debt solution. Fans often guess what will happen if the price of XRP goes up to hundreds or even thousands of dollars, which would make the market capitalization big enough to pay off all the debt. Some people say this is a myth because value doesn't just appear out of thin air. It needs to be backed by acceptance, usefulness, and cash flow. But if governments required or encouraged the use of XRP for large-scale payments, demand might go through the roof. Step 4, alignment around the world. The U.S. can't work alone in this area. Other countries would have to agree to use XRP as well if it were to be used as a kind of global bridge currency. These changes could happen through treaties, trade deals, or a bigger resetting of the world's money order. Ripple has already tried it out with central banks through pilot projects like the Digital Pound Foundation, Bhutan's CBDC program, and tests with Singapore's Monetary Authority. It's not hard to see how these small steps could lead to bigger systemic acceptance if the US backed them. Let's take a moment to ask the tough question. Why XRP in particular? Why couldn't the US government just make its own digital currency called CBDC and use that as the base? That is, in theory, a US CBDC is already being talked about at the Federal Reserve. But making something completely new would take years of planning, testing, and getting approval from the government. It could get a lot of political opposition from people who care about privacy, banks, and the public. On the other hand, XRP already exists, has been through a lot of testing, and is decentralized enough to claim freedom while still being structured enough to fit into regulatory frameworks. It's a compromise between Bitcoin's chaos and a CBDC's order. Still, there are huge problems. To accept a private or semi-private asset like XRP by the US goes against the very idea of sovereignty. Having money gives you power. Private businesses are almost never hired by governments to handle their money. And some people think that Ripple could eventually be taken over by the government or officially linked to government institutions in order to ease this tension. There have been times like this before. In the past, the US has taken over private developments like railroads, telegraphs, telephones, and even the internet when they were needed for national infrastructure. Let's talk about politics as well. The US dollar has been the world's main currency for decades, which has given the US a lot of power, but that control is being questioned more and more. Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, or BRICS, are publicly talking about trade options other than the dollar. China has sped up the process of introducing its digital yuan. In this situation, the US might think that using XRP or another neutral global bridge asset is a good way to keep its power in the digital age. If the value of the dollar goes down, the trains that move money around the world could become the new seat of power. It would be smart to make sure that these lines are based on technology that supports American interests. There is one thing that is clear. This cryptocurrency, XRP, is already being talked about around the world, whether people like it or not. Over the years, it has had to deal with a lot of problems, including cases from regulators, doubts from economists, and jokes from people who saw it as just another speculative token. XRP is still around, changing, and being used in real life. Despite all of that, it hasn't been forgotten like a lot of digital goods have. Instead, it has slowly made a name for itself as a bridge currency and settlement tool that moves value quickly and cheaply across borders. This is something that no other asset has been able to do as well. Banks, payment companies, and other financial institutions have teamed up with XRP to show that it is more than just a myth. This technology has real-world uses. The acceptance curve keeps going up even when it seems like progress is moving slowly. That kind of persistence is important because in the long game of global finance, companies that show they can last are the ones that make it. As the 21st century's monetary restart draws near, XRP may not be the only player in the field, but its strength has earned it a place at the table. So, let's go back to the first question. Might XRP become the backbone of American finance, a way to rework trillions of dollars in debt? It's possible, but not for sure. Private innovators, state institutions, and global players would have to work together in a way that has never been seen before. Trust and change would be needed for it to work. But we can learn from past that when the stakes are high enough, the unlikely can happen. That brings us to one of the questions that has been ignored the most during this whole conversation. What would it be like to actually go through such a change? Not in Washington, D.C. or in boardrooms around the world. Instead, in homes across America and the world. First, let's talk about how money makes people feel. A lot of people don't care about monetary policy, balance sheets, or liquidity lanes when it comes to money. It has to do with safety. It's about being able to afford to buy food, pay bills, send kids to college, or leave with pride. When people talk about the national debt, they often don't understand what it means because trillions of dollars are too vague to understand. But debt problems don't look like numbers when they happen. They look like prices going up, jobs being lost, homes being foreclosed on, retirement accounts getting smaller, and safety nets not working. This is why the thought of a new digital backbone like XRP makes people feel so strongly. It's not enough to just fix the system. The question is whether or not people think they can make their financial lives safer, more stable, and more reliable. Technology wouldn't be the first problem if there was a real plan to use XRP as part of a financial restart in the United States. It would be getting people to agree with you. The psychological tipping point always comes when people start to lose faith in the old system and slowly start to trust the new one. History teaches us that these kinds of changes are less about the details and more about what people believe as a group, like when the US stopped using gold as money in 1971. Many people thought at the time that taking away the dollar's golden base would cause it to fall. In fact, the opposite took place. The dollar grew in power not because it had more value, but because people kept using it, accepting it, and eventually trusting it. The dollar was the main currency in the world for many years because people trusted it and institutions backed it. The same psychological concept would still be true if XRP were ever presented as a new basis for international payments or even more general financial functions. It wouldn't be enough for the technology to work well or be safe. People, businesses, and foreign countries would all have to be able to believe the story in order for XRP to be seen as more than just an experiment and become a permanent part of the world. XRP could go from being a speculative asset to a trusted part of the new financial order if people believe it will last and if it is backed by openness and good governance. Let's look at how the market works now. Let us say that the SEC case is over, institutions start using XRP for settlements, and states start to use it on a larger scale. What does the market do? The first result would be changes in the flow of money. There is a lot of volatility, speculation, and impact from small traders, whales, and algorithmic bots in the way XRP is traded right now, just like most other digital assets. That would change right away if governments or big banks started to accumulate. In public markets, there would be no more supply because institutional demand quietly soaks up cash. Price increases might not happen slowly over time, but all of a sudden, as supply gets limited and speculation grows. Derivatives and financialization would be the second result. Wall Street doesn't let an asset get bigger without adding more on top of it. Hedge funds, pension managers, and sovereign wealth funds would be able to buy and sell XRP through futures, options, exchange-traded funds, ETFs, and complex products. This would make it easier to get money, but it would also raise systemic risk because swaps can make exposure much bigger than the supply. Regulators would have to carefully balance new ideas with stability if XRP is to really become a backbone currency. The third result would be a shift in the distribution of wealth. People who bought XRP early on and hung on to it during its years of stagnation would see their fortunes change. Millionaires and billionaires could appear overnight, which could be both inspiring and frustrating. History shows that whenever a new financial order comes into being, it makes both winners and losers. A restart driven by XRP would change the wealth map in the same way that Bitcoin's rise created a new class of rich technocrats. To handle the damage, governments would probably tax, limit wealth, or even force people to convert. What about the effect on the whole world? Power would change hands if XRP became a main asset for payment. Smaller countries, especially those that are struggling with inflation or being too dependent on the dollar, might jump at the chance to use a neutral bridge currency that isn't fully controlled by one sovereign country. For them, XRP could mean more than just speed. It could mean freedom. Rival powers, on the other hand, might fight it because they see it as an American Trojan horse meant to regain power in the digital age. This friction could cause splits, partnerships, and two separate global systems, one centered on US-backed XRP infrastructure and the other on alternatives like China's digital yuan. Also, let's not forget about the effect on society. For most people, the change might not seem big at first. Payments could settle right away instead of having to wait days for foreign wires. Migrant workers could send money across borders for less money than it costs to send money back home. Banks might advertise new accounts that use XRP by saying they will give better returns or lower costs. But the change would become part of culture over time. The language of money could change, just like debit cards used to be checkbooks and mobile wallets are now cash. Need to know how many XRP that is worth. Could one day sound like asking, how much is it in dollars? But this is where we need to be realistic again. It is a very interesting idea to use XRP to pay off America's $40 trillion debt. Even if the price of XRP shot through the roof, turning debt obligations into XRP reserves would be hard to do, controversial, and fraught with legal issues. The lenders would have to agree. Groups from around the world would have to agree. Along the way, powerful groups that gain from the current dollar order would fight back at every turn. It's more possible that a gradual hybrid approach will work. Instead of being reset all at once, XRP could start out as a niche payment tool, grow as more banks start to use it, and over time become a global reserve that works with the dollar. Over the course of several years or decades, it could play a bigger role in trade finance, sovereign reserves, and finally reorganizing debt. This slower path doesn't fit the dramatic idea of a sudden world flip, but it's more in line with how money systems have changed over time. But we should never forget that crises can start things off. Most of the time, big changes don't happen slowly. They happen quickly and under a lot of stress. Social Security came about because of the Great Depression. World War II was the start of the Bretton Woods system. The disaster of 2008 gave rise to Bitcoin. If the U.S. really has a debt crisis, one in which people lose faith in treasury bonds, inflation goes through the roof, or foreign buyers refuse to roll over debt, leaders may have to think of answers that no one would have thought of before. In this case, XRP could go from being a speculative asset to a world lifeline very quickly. The next question is whether we are in that kind of transitional time. Some say yes. As debt rises, global relationships change, and technology improves, the stage is set for a new event. Some people say no, that the dollar is too strong to be overthrown, and XRP will only be able to compete in a few niches. Both sides have good points. It's not important to know for sure what will happen. What counts is noticing the forces at work and getting ready for all the possible outcomes. This is not just a story about XRP or Ripple, that's why. The story shows how people change when old ways of doing things don't work anymore. It's about being strong, coming up with new ideas, and always trying to build trust in money. XRP might or might not become the main part of America's financial reset, but its rise shows that people are looking for options and are no longer happy with the way things are. The fact that these kinds of talks are happening shows that change is on the way, even if XRP doesn't end up being the chosen road. And when history is written about how the financial order of the 21st century came to be, the debates of today, no matter how speculative they may seem, may be the first pages. I've put together something you should look into if you really want to see where XRP could be going in the long term.